Okay. So now we're live. Let me share it. Okay. We're live, folks. Okay, so I just posted that. So people should start to trickle in. I think we did actually get a couple of RSVPs for the actual, which sometimes we don't get any. So hopefully a couple folks show up. And
Yeah, no, we shared it on our LinkedIn, Black and Brown Founders LinkedIn, and I shared it on my personal.
Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful. Yeah, we have 4. Looks like, well, I think Mercedes, but I think is with, and then Mara. Okay, interesting. Okay, we'll let people come on board, and then we can kick in. We should do like a quick, like, welcome, blah blah blah, and then we start. Okay, so let me pull up the questions here. Okay, I'm going to kick us off. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Accelerator Insider, where we talk to industry experts about how they are building accelerators, innovation studios, and venture labs as well. I'm excited today to talk to Deldelp Medina, who is the executive director of Black and Brown Founders. So welcome, Deldelp.
Hello. Thank you so much, Dominique. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Yes, I'm really excited. And so, we met a couple years ago. We had a really good conversation when we first met about the work that you've been doing, and just the work more broadly for Black and Brown Founders. So, I know we talked a little bit about some of the things we want to discuss today, but I'd love to just maybe even start with kind of what led you here. I've looked at your background. It's very varied. You've done a lot of different things, I think, with a social impact or social justice lens. But what led you to the intersection of tech and social justice?
I wouldn't necessarily say that is. It's interesting. It's always interesting to hear somebody reflect your experience back to you, because I think like the reality is, I often say, the only reason I'm having this conversation with you is that I've failed a lot.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of failures, and I've tried to learn from every single failure that I've had. And I've also had a lot of experiences. I'm a Latina, first generation person here in the US. That on itself prescribes a whole bunch of ways in which the world wants to put you in certain categories. And a set of experiences that, as a result of that, are just a reality for me and my family. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that this was a career that I was looking for. I would almost say, like, I don't even know what it's like to think about a career, because I don't come from people who think about careers who gave me that map. It was more like, you have to get a job. Heck, if you can have 3 to 4 jobs, the better. I actually had an aunt that sat me down and was like, if you can have 3 jobs while you're young, have 3 jobs while you're young, save as much money as possible, invest where you can, because this country is not going to guarantee anything for you. And that was a message that I definitely took very much to heart when I was younger, because it's true. Like, as a woman of color, I earn less than my white male counterparts and my white female counterparts. As a woman of color, I often have less opportunities. Even though I might have the right experience or I might have the right perspective, my perspective hasn't always been valued, because it wasn't the general consensus one. And so what is exciting to me right now, in the middle of this, what I call a demographic and generational shift, is that the voices of folks that are like me and that have had experiences like mine, and yours and many others, are valued in a different way. And that when it comes to building tech products in particular, I always argue that if you're going to start from a lean startup model in which the customer is always right and the customer needs to get what they want in the ways that they want it, to ignore that demographic and generational shift is to do so at your peril.
Mhm.
It is for you to build the best product possible. You actually have to consider folks of color.
Mhm.
You sometimes should center folks of color
Mhm.
because we are the ones that are the future owners of this country. The average school child right now in the state of California is a kid of color.
Mhm.
Um, when you think about that, you think about who's actually going to be consuming things.
Mhm.
And so, what I often say is that we're taught to be great consumers, but we're not taught to actually be creators when we are extremely creative culture makers. And that
Mhm.
tech shouldn't be the exception, it should be the rule because tech at the end of the day is a set of tools.
Mhm.
And it is the set of tool that is allowing us to have this conversation. It is a set of tools that allows us to do a series of things. And so if we're not centered in that work, if we're not working on these products, if we're not creating these products, um, the reality is it's not going to go well for anybody.
Yes, no, I mean, you said so many things that I wanna, like, jump in on, oh my gosh, but in that quick intro, I mean, so the first thing that you brought up that I just, like, is so powerful, about how you were raised. I think this is like a misnomer, right? Because when you're in tech or when you work in tech or you're a startup founder, whether and honestly, I think even for to many, you know, in many ways, whether you're a person of color or not, you still have a profile. You went to a top school,
Yes.
went to have a top job, um, and that profile is what unlocks those doors for you fundamentally. And then you're talking about a different story, which in this moment is so useful, particularly to share
Mhm.
because I think what you said about what your aunt said to you is just amazing, right? Because this is the assumption of, well, you don't have a steady job, so therefore you're not reliable, or you don't know how to do this, or you don't know how to do that. When it's like actually what's really happening is very thoughtfully at that time, your aunt was like, I'm looking at the situation, right? I'm saying, here's what you can do with what you got, and here's how you
Yeah.
make that into something more. And that's like the most resourceful thing you can do. That's
Yeah.
like the most resourceful thing as an entrepreneur. I always tell people like before there was tech, there was just people building things and doing things. And like that's like the culture of most people in America who are like and around the world who have to just like get it done to get it done.
Yeah.
They were already entrepreneurs before you called it that.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So I love that. So when you think about the folks that are in your program, are you finding folks intentionally or just by accident that are fitting that similar narrative? Or are they really coming from like all walks and talks and backgrounds? Or is it really like we're trying to really solve for this community with this sub community within the Black and Brown community?
It's interesting you should ask that. People, and this has been something I struggle with. So I don't come from a marketing background. I come from a product background, and the things that I've learned about financing have been things that I've taught myself, or I've learned from others, or classes that I've taken. Um, I would say like that's the other thing that's led me to be here is just a sense of curiosity. I think having a sense of curiosity and asking a series of questions and knowing how to formulate questions to get the right answers
Yeah.
has been something that I've really worked on. I always try to ask good questions so that I can get a good answer. And so because I don't come from marketing, I find that the more honest we are as a team, the
Mhm.
more grounded in who we are and what our ethos is, the more we attract people that are interested in that.
Mhm.
People who are going to join our programs are not folks who are looking for a traditional program
Mhm.
in the sense of, I want to come in, I want to build something, I want to get out, I want to get access to venture capital.
Mhm.
We're very clear that venture capital, I mean, our program is called the Bootstrapping Bootcamp because we're like, very few people have access to venture capital,
Yeah.
period. In general,
Yeah.
very few people from our communities get access to venture capital
Yeah.
also.
Yeah.
And that does not mean that the resources that we have at hand does not allow us to build products that can actually make us money. And
Yeah.
that venture capital in general is one slice of financing.
Yeah.
And so I have a bigger critique of the lack of financing for entrepreneurial activity in this country. So it
Yeah.
doesn't matter. Like I often say, people go like, well, what if I want to build a cafe? Can I come to your program? And I'm like, right now, if I wanted to open a place on the corner and it is a bakery, a panaderia, and I bought an oven, it's gonna have software attached to it. My point of sale is gonna have software attached to it. My mother jokes that we're all pushing buttons now, that that's our job, is to push buttons. But there's something that's true about that, which is there is not one business right now that you can start and be successful at it that doesn't have software attached to it. How do
Mm,
you work with that software? How do you work with tech tools? That is a different question. And so
mm,
often we find ourselves in this intersection of folks who are like, we want to build something or we want to create something that's entrepreneurial. Um, that so often it wouldn't be considered traditionally a tech company.
mm,
And then we have some folks who are like, I'm a coder, but I never learned any business, things. Or I'm a media entrepreneur and I've gotten stuck. Or I've applied to, accelerators and incubators and I haven't gotten in, but I can't let go of this idea. We really support a lot of folks that are coming from those different lenses. But the
mm,
thing that we say to people, number one, is if you don't know what assets you have and what assets you can bring, it just makes it much harder to build a product. So
yeah.
you have to be very centered in who you are and what you want and what your goals are for you to be able to build the proper product. And so those are the folks that we tend to attract, are
Mm,
folks that are not necessarily looking for or have not been successful with some other methodologies that exist out there,
mhm,
but have found success with our methodology because we really like to center the human first. Who are
mhm,
you? What are your responsibilities? What what it, what do you have access to? And then what can you build with the things that you have?
yeah.
So that regardless of whether you get funding or not, regardless of whether you get a loan or not, regardless of whether you have a rich aunt or uncle, like you can still build a company that's successful for yourself.
Yeah. No, that makes a tons of, I mean, I love that you said that. And I remember our first conversation when you shared some insights around banking. And I was like, wow. Like, I was like, that is the conversation because I see a lot of folks right now, doing, I'm in venture right now, currently doing things in venture capital. Um, all the programs are focused on helping people get jobs in venture capital, which there are no jobs in venture capital, comparatively to other industries. Having people become angel investors, where it's like if you're not making $1 million or more, it's the riskiest asset class. You should not be doing that. You should be investing in other. There's a lot of more ways to make your 5K or 10K become something more than investing at the angel stage. It's super risky, and I think about that because I'm like, those things are happening because at the top there has been a push for equity and access, and now foundations and philanthropic groups are funding these programs, but it's
Yeah.
really the wrong cue. I mean, you talked a lot about like the only reason that this, I mean, not maybe not the only reason, but one reason why this asset class or category is expanded is because there's nowhere else to get money to build something that you
Yeah.
used to get money from the bank, and now you can't get
Yeah.
money from
Yeah.
the bank,
I
and now
mean,
you're crowdfunding and crowdsourcing from other people. And so the government has stepped away from that. Private sector has come in, and then we're basically leveraging other people to self-fund, not just pay for service, but fund the idea before service is delivered.
yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to just get your thoughts on that, and a little bit because you kind of know so much about it. Kind of, what got
Yeah.
you there? Yeah.
I mean, the thing is like, once again, financing as a whole, as a category, and really understanding what are the opportunities around financing. I had a conversation recently with a colleague, and that's exactly what we said. Like, there is a lack of financing products out there that really enable for the US to be entrepreneurial. And I often say that Silicon Valley became the tail that wags the dog. The reality is that the majority of folks who are entrepreneurial are Black women and Latinas and Asian women. These are the three groups demographically that are the most entrepreneurial, that start the most amount of businesses. And these are the three groups that also have the least amount of access to financing. So several things have happened. Number one, we've seen people become millionaires and billionaires during a tech boom that are of a specific group of people with a specific type of financing, because we don't have banks that are giving out small business loans. The SBA as an entity has really shifted a lot of their money, and the US Treasury overall, which is the thing that oversees the SBA. So that's the other thing that most people don't even understand how these systems work, right? And when I tell you, like, I don't come from financing and I've had to study these things on my own, I would include myself of like the majority of my life. I did not understand how these things work. And that nobody really teaches you these things unless you go to business school. And very few people actually go to business school. Like, that's another thing. Overall, it is an extremely elite thing, but all of us are a part of economic systems. And so these are the waters that we swim in, so often not understanding how the currents are even built. So the US Treasury oversees the Small Business Administration. The US Treasury has moved a lot of the money that they used to give to banks to be able to do small business loans since the 2008 crash, has moved it to CDFIs. So CDFIs are community development finance institutions. When I tell most entrepreneurs, where is your local CDFI? Most of them say, what is that? But most of them do know what a bank is because they've known historically what banks have done, right? So CDFIs, and this has been my critique to CDFI leaders, and they know this, CDFI leaders in general also have parameters that they have to meet. And the way that they can help people finance things is very difficult. So we just don't have an asset class. We don't have a banking structure. We don't have a financing, set of instruments that allows people to be able to say, I'm taking a risk and being entrepreneurial. How can I get access to financing when I need it? Because in the beginning, you don't really need financing. In the beginning, you have to make something with what you have. You have to create something. You have to go out there and make sales. But if you want to grow your business, at some point, you're going to need financing. And what VC does is that you're pre-selling a part of your company before you're making money. In financing, what you're saying is, this is how much money I've made, and this is the kind of bridge I need, because with the money that I'm going to get, I'm not only going to be able to pay back this loan, but I'm also going to be able to do something because I'm going to invest in it. And so depending on what business you're in, whether you hold inventory or don't hold inventory, whether you have overhead that is significant or you don't have overhead that's significant, at the end of the day, people just need access to financing. And we're just not having that overall conversation about what do financing things look like. And we're all trying to like go, and people have gone heavy into VC. I often say, like, I'm not anti-VC, I'm pro-revenue, right? And people getting revenue in through the door. I have a lot of great friends who are VCs. Their business is a very specific type of business. And so if you are going to approach a VC, you have to understand what kind of business they're in. And so often, specifically for folks of color, I see so much disappointment, and and I've heard so many stories of discrimination, and I've heard so many stories of sexism and homophobia and transphobia. Like, you name a thing, I've heard it. Like, I'm not excusing that behavior or that way of being. Like, let me be clear about that. But you also have to know if you even qualify, or even if even that is the appropriate kind of financing you want to get. And that is a whole nother level of education that people have to engage in. And so often people are like, I see a problem. I want to solve the problem. I think I'm uniquely positioned to solve that problem. I want to create a solution.
Right.
And that thing has only been done through a VC lens for the last 15 years. And now I feel like, once again, with this demographic and generational shift that we're undergoing, we can't continue to let the Silicon Valley way be the only way that we actually solve these problems. We have plenty of problems, and we have people who want to be solution makers and also make a living out of it, and also create businesses where people have jobs, and also be able to hold up a community. It shouldn't be dependent on just one type of financing. I think that that's just an unhealthy economic balance.
And to your point, like, that's not even really venture capital's fault, right? Like, you think about like historic venture capitalists, and they're looking around like, what are you talking about? Like, it's the new VC,
Yeah.
It's a vibe, it's a culture, it's a cool thing to do, because you have a lot of folks who,
Yeah.
if you think about VC historically, it's like these were guys who worked in finance. They were really doing, Series C, at what we consider Series C types of investments, or even private
Yeah.
equity. They were really doing large, kind of highly analytical assessments of companies, and they were like solid bets in the category of venture, which is already a risky
Yeah.
asset class, the risky asset class, right? As we democratize access to venture capital, we've gone down funnel
Yeah.
to even more and more risk. And then I tell people, like, pre-seed to me is like Russian roulette.
Yeah.
And then you have like private equity, which is blackjack, but it's all still gambling.
Yeah.
Right. And so you end up with this, as the ecosystem, or the startup ecosystem, innovation ecosystem, and economy has expanded, you end up with service providers and people that want to create tools for other entrepreneurs and angel investors. And so everyone's reading off kind of this made up playbook.
Yeah.
Right. But if you talk to someone who's been like, you talk to a historically, older white male who's been a venture, he's 70 years old now.
Yep.
He'll be like, what are you talking about? That was never the use case for venture capital. And it was never really meant to be democratic to begin with.
Yes.
And like, there's an honesty in that, right? That I think we kind of miss. And then what I hear a lot with folks as well is like, oh, it's all these different isms that are reasons why I'm not able to raise money, when it's actually like the business fundamentally was never made for that. Like, your business was never made for that.
Yeah.
The growth trajectory you're on was never going to hit the requirements of venture. And then it's like, well, if you just kind of, and then it becomes an education issue. But then I also think to myself sometimes, I'm like, it's an education issue for sure. But to be able to then make a choice that says you still might not be right for venture capital, even with the education, when you find out what it actually is, you're like, oh, that might not be for me. Right.
I mean, I think that there's levels to this. There's the individual level, there's the socioeconomic level, but there's also the overall level. And I think like some of what you're mentioning to me is that socioeconomic part. I mean, the reality is that this country has still not contended with the fact that it stole people from Africa and it stole their labor while it was here, like we still haven't contended with that. So where people are at in terms of their sense of well-being and their understanding of the trauma, like that alone is a thing. The fact that we still haven't contended with the fact that we're on stolen land. And, I'm on the unceded territory of the Ohlone Ramaytush. Like that's a thing. The fact that we have not had immigration reform because people are profiting off of practically free to nothing labor right now from folks who have come here under horrible circumstances. But we cannot contend with that. And so at the end of the day, like a lot of these things are intertied, at least from my point of view, because I have to talk to people and help them think through, why do you think you're not worthy? Why do you think you're getting stuck? Why do you think you're not able to ask for what you're truly worth? I have a lot of conversations with people around that. And so I see people underprice themselves in terms of their products. I see people not be able to like properly sell their product in a way that there's an opportunity because they think that they have to be perfect. I see all of those things. And then we have a system that essentially is saying, I don't know if you're good enough. And those things clash. I see those clashes all the time. And so when you're like, it's an educational issue, yes, but it's also a social emotional issue in which I know I've had to do a lot of work around these things. I know that I've had to, like, I'm a big, like, my joke is like, a therapist, a psychiatrist, a rabbi, a shaman, meditation, acupuncture, like I've tried it all. I will continue to try all these things out. Because, when I think of that aunt that I mentioned to you, who was like, you got to go get 3 to 4 jobs. She was someone who managed through crook and hook to become financially stable, but never enjoyed that financial stability. Always felt like at any moment, all of it can be pulled under. Never was able to relax into a life that was so different from what she started. A life in which she had access to food 3 times a day, but constantly believed that she was going to go starving at any moment, because there would be moments in her lifetime where there was no food in our house, you know? Those things stick to you. And so I think, like, I also try to have compassion for people as they're trying to prove their worthiness in a system that was never built for us. Like, the system overall was never built for us. It was never built for you or me to be having this conversation. It was never considered that these things would be true for us, but that we, both as individuals in our families and our communities, have never dealt with a lot of the trauma that the system has created generationally at this point. And so, like, that's another place that I'm really clear about. Like, sometimes when I'm talking to people, it isn't often about the thing. It's about all the other things that we don't have a conversation about. It's about all the other things that they've never had to question or think about or consider. It's about, like, I have to be so successful because I am the one in my family that managed to do this thing. I'm the one that graduated from high school, got to go to college. I'm the one that doesn't have an accent. I'm the one that can pass for something. I'm the one that didn't go to jail. I'm the one that, whatever it might be, that you're the one. The reality is that those things are also traumatic, and you have to deal with that to be able to be emotionally connected with the work that you're doing in a way that's healthy, and therefore be able to make decisions under duress and under stress that are actually going to benefit you in the long run. I know that I've made terrible decisions. When I tell you that I have failed, I have failed. Like, when I tell you that I've made horrible decisions on businesses that I've started, on deals that I shouldn't have made, on all of those things, I've made those mistakes because I wasn't taking care of, and I wasn't taking a look at what do these things actually mean for me, and how do I move beyond my trauma of, like, are we going to end up homeless if I make a bad deal? Like, I've had that fear. Like, if you don't ask those questions, you don't get answers. And if you don't know how to work with the answer that you get, then you are definitely going to not be in a place to be able to actually move beyond the trauma itself.
I think you're right about that. And I know Mercedes, thank you, is joining. Ramona's here. Hi, nice to see you guys. Love it. And so, no, I love what you're talking about here, because, to your point, I asked another person the same question about education, and I, the broader thought for me has always been separate of education. I mean, in terms of not like education around like how to build a business, but like education of what the system is that you're sitting inside of, right? Like, do you understand it? I often have asked this other question, which is like, why entrepreneurship? Out of all the ways to create financial sustainability, why entrepreneurship? Because I remember there's a quote this guy said. He was a writer, and he said, writing, he's like, if I could do anything else other than write, I would, because it's a crapshoot. But he was a writer. And he was like, all I do is write, and I love it, but it's so painful, of an industry, of a job, of a career.
Yeah.
I kind of think that about entrepreneurship. Like, if you could do anything else, do it, because this is not for the faint of heart. I'd love to know from your perspective, do you see yourself as an entrepreneur? Why do you think entrepreneurship is maybe the answer, or maybe it's not the answer, but a answer, and to what?
I would consider myself entrepreneurial. I think two things. Like, number one, that's literally what fed my family. Like, both my grandmothers were extremely entrepreneurial. Like, and I often, we're in the middle of a community discussion around here in San Francisco, and in particular in the Mission, about who gets to be entrepreneurial and who gets to get access to resources as a result of that, right? And so it's like, if my grandmothers hadn't been doing the things I did, we wouldn't have eaten. Like, that's just the reality. Whether it was that they were seamstresses, they were, like, at one point, like, both of my grandmothers had corner stores. They, like, one of them sold shoes door to door. They would make jams. They would crochet things, they would knit things, they like, you name a thing, they would be making it. Like if they had access to the Etsy shop back in the day, oh my God, we would have done really, really well. They were just like, what do I need to do to feed my kids? What do I need to do? How do I do it? What are my gifts? What can I do here? And so I grew up with people like that. I grew up with people like that because it is so painful, who would say to me, don't do it. Go get a good job. You're so lucky. You speak English. You can go get a job at an office. It's going to be like one of my grandmothers would say, you're going to get a clean job. You're going to be able to not deal with stuff that I had to deal with. So like, don't do it. And so I think I always had a fear around it because it was always like that love came with a warning, that wanting to take care of me came with a warning. And so I had a fear for a really long time. I always knew that I wanted to be entrepreneurial. I always knew that I loved helping my grandmothers out with whatever latest thing they were coming up with, whether it was like working at the corner store that my grandmother had, or, making jam or whatever it was. I always loved it. And so I always had a lot of fear. And so it was during the 2010 where I just saw that Silicon Valley boom happening around me and just be like, oh, I have ideas too. Oh, I know how to do things. I was a database administrator by training. I had worked a lot with data and data sets in both health and all sorts of different kinds of organizations. And that was something that I really loved. And I was like, oh, a part of like new tech was around data. And I was like, oh, there's an opportunity here. And so like, that's when I embarked on it. I lost my job that I really enjoyed. And I was just like, okay, let me take a risk. And I took a risk. But I hadn't necessarily done all the work around, like I said, like, what is my worth? How do I feel about money? How do I think about money? How do I work with money? How do I present myself around it? I shied away in ways that I don't think were healthy. I also avoided things that I shouldn't have avoided. And that was a huge lesson. And so I had 2 businesses back to back that essentially failed. But in that process, I learned a lot. And in that process, that led me to support other entrepreneurs because I was willing to take a look at kind of like all my failures, I think in a way that other people didn't or wouldn't or can't. And that I ended up becoming a community resource person in a way that I wasn't expecting. And that I didn't plan. And speaking of careers, like I did not plan that. And then I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this, how can I get some training around lean startup, to classes on UX, UI? What were, finance? How does the VC world work? How does this investment, ecosystem work? Just like took a lot of classes, read a lot of books, asked a lot of questions and try to figure things out. And that's what led me to be here. But I really do think at the end of the day, it's like, whether you have a job or not, like, and in this current economy, financial futures, if you have less than a certain amount of assets, are not guaranteed, period. And it is in our best interest to become educated on financial systems. And it is in your best interest to learn how to be able to pivot really quickly if needed. Like that is something that I know for a fact. I think that the pandemic in particular showed that to me. I ended up working with a lot of people who got laid off. A lot of people who didn't know what was going to happen for their financial future. People who were like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, what am I going to do? I know so many folks who are like, I know how to make cookies, so I'm going to make cookies out of my little oven in my small little studio apartment. And that's what kept them going. And so I think about that too. It's like our economic realities are such that if you are not taking a look at the systems that you're interacting with economically, like it's going to be really painful. So it doesn't matter whether you have a W-2 or not. You have to think about the world in an entrepreneurial way to be able to build the future that you want.
I love that. And so we could talk for a long time about this, but I do want to talk a little bit about the program because I know people are going to be like, what about the actual boot camp? And so maybe you can talk to me a little bit about the boot camp, just brass tacks, like how it works,
Yeah.
what a founder receives, who should apply.
Yeah. So the boot camp was created by Ania Williams and Francesca Scotto, two great friends of mine, both innovators, both great entrepreneurs, people who think about systems and systems building a lot. And I get to be the steward of it, is the way that I think about it. So they've created, and I've been the steward of it. It is 10 weeks. But some people it takes 3 months, some people it takes 6 months, and that's okay. We really just want to work with people who are curious, who have a problem they want to solve. And so what we aim to do is to help people go from their first idea to their first prototype. And by prototype, we mean it could be something that's just like not very well put together. It's like it, I call it like, gum and a piece of paper and whatever, but you have to have something that's tangible that people understand and want to work with. In a world where low code and no code are options that in which you can test out assumptions about what kind of things customers want, you're going to be doing great. In a world where AI is everywhere and you're able to create things using AI right now really, really quickly and save time, energy, and money, like you can build things really, really quickly and you can test things out. At the end of the day, my thing is, how are you going to get people to put money in your pocket? What kind of value do you have where people can be able to put money in your pocket? Building an app in this economy right now is not that difficult, but it doesn't guarantee you money in your pocket. If you don't have customers and if you're not solving a problem and people are not willing to pay you for that product, then you don't have an actual business. You might have a hobby, you might have an interest, you might have a community resource, but it is not an actual business. And so like, that's the thing that I tell people all the time, like, how are you going to get people to give you money?
So are folks coming into the program with just an idea and they haven't built, or are they having half built? And
Some
then
people, some people have come in with things that they've built and they haven't seen the successes that they want. And so we ask them to start from scratch in some ways in terms of like the analysis of how they got to where they are and what are the issues that they've had. And so for some people, it includes tweaking things. And for some people, it means scrapping everything, but actually keeping the knowledge and understanding that they had. We've had some people come in being very clear and being like, this is the thing I want to do. And this is why I want to do it. And then like halfway through the program being like, actually, this might not be a very good idea. Because at the end of the day, like I said, if customers don't want it, then there is no product.
Is so because you guys are doing dev work, I think the question people oftentimes ask is it a paid program because you're actually hiring a developer or someone to help you build the tool, or is it free, or what's the scope of?
So we do have a fee and we don't do development work. What we do is give people access to tools that they are able to test out their assumptions. Yeah. So it's like, we give you access.
An ideation bootcamp. I mean, really the ideation validation.
Yeah,
bootcamp.
exactly. It's like, here's a set of tools that you want to take a look at. Here's how you work with these set of tools. Here's what you can test out based on that. And then go test it out and see how much money people are willing to give you for that. And it's interesting because that is the thing that people want to hear, because that's the end result. The reality is that the majority of the work in the first half of the program is really about centering you, who you are, what your goals are, both financially, family structure, how do you want to spend your time? All of those things are questions that we ask people to ground themselves on, and then really question, like, am I the person to ask and answer properly these questions that are going to get me a product that people want to buy? So the first part of the program is really a lot about the human and who you are and where you come from and what are the things you want to achieve. And I have to tell you, that is hard work. And a lot of people have a really hard time, and it brings up a lot of things. And so I would say, like, grounding people in their reality is the first part of the work that we do before we get to the product and before we get to customer discovery and before we get to all these other things.
Well, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me because of, this broader question of why. I think people oftentimes think, entrepreneurship becomes an answer to a lot of whys, right? I want freedom, I want financial growth, I want success, I want to travel. And all those whys are actually fine. It's just matching that why to the thing you're building so that it's right sized for the expectation of what you're trying to create. I think people are like, I want to, make $1 million. I'm like, but you really just needed $100,000. Like, like it right size that, and it's going to help you match, your current placement, how to build something. Because of all the increase in software tools, to your point, the low code, the no codes, I was looking at, something in Bubble the other day and whatnot, with AI now flowing in, how is that impacting, you think, founders, or how even founders work with you all? I ask this because I get a lot of founders who are more in the tech space, who are building their own stuff. They're like, oh, we're an AI tool. I'm like, no, honey. Everyone's an AI tool. That's not you. That's not it's not a value proposition that you get to espouse unless you are like layer one, like you're building foundation of this thing. That's already been built. So you are layer two, layer three, whatever. So, people think that's like the cool value prop. Like, it's not. It's just the way of doing business. It's a requirement of technology now. How are you seeing it integrate? How are you working with folks around understanding what it is?
Actually, next year, that's one of the things we want to launch. We want to launch kind of like a series of AI trainings, of how to think about using AI tools. Once again, they are tools. They're not the destination. It is a way in which you work. So the way that I think about it, in particular, AI, two things. One, technology, and VC in particular, loves to have the latest wave of things, right? So whereas like software as service was the thing a couple of years ago, and then, you know what I mean? Like, then it was like HR tech, and then it's like everything always has a cycle and that cycle, and people try to build for that cycle, rather than build for longevity. And I think like that's exactly an issue. AI is just one more methodology. And it's just one more tool. How you work with that tool, how you think about working with that tool, what kind of workflows you have, like that's a different conversation. Because I do think that I don't know if you paid attention to the UFW strike, so the auto workers strike that happened in Detroit. So one of the things that they were arguing was like, you want us to work with robots? Fantastic. We will have a generation of people who are not going to break their backs, break their knees, have a series of issues, because humans should not be, picking up and moving certain things that are extremely heavy, and cars have gotten heavier. So fantastic. You want us to work with robots? We'll work with robots. Robots are not a problem. Robots are going to be able to do things that humans can't do, but there are things that humans can't do that robots no time soon are going to be able to do. So what we want is, we'll work with the robots. We want to get paid more money. We want to have better health insurance, and we want to have a pension. That to me is like a way of thinking through how to work with technology in a way that benefits humans. And so you have to think of that equivalent for AI. How do I work with a tool that's going to save me time, energy, and money, so that I can dedicate my time, energy, and money for other things? Or I am going to be able to have a workflow that allows me to have access to things in a way that before it would have taken me a lot more time, energy, and money. And so like, that's the thinking through that I think people have to do. And so if you are building something that is AI, that is truly AI, you have to think through the ethical and consequences of it. Where are you getting that data? What kind of data are you feeding to the machine? Like, what does it look like to actually build data sets that don't have a whole bunch of bias built into it? there's a whole bunch of like AI tools right now around, making drawings and that sort of thing. But they're extremely biased. So it's like, make me a character that's, blah, blah, blah. Chances are 9 out of 10, it's going to give you a blonde, blue-eyed character. When the majority of the people in this world are not blonde or blue-eyed, right? So it's the sort of thing that I would say, like, if you are truly building an AI tool, how are you building it with a cultural competency in mind for the new America that is around the corner? Or in some cases here in the state of California, we are already here. Like, there is no such thing as a minority. There's no such thing as a majority. We are a truly extremely mixed state. And our kids are growing up seeing that as the norm. So how is it that we're going to be able to build data sets in a way that is going to reflect their reality? I don't know. Like, that's a question that people should be asking and hopefully finding answers for.
No, I think you're spot on, and there's so much in what you're saying. I mean, there's so much knowledge and wisdom in that. I think folks, I always tell people, like, there's the story, there's what you're building, and there's a story of what you're building, and know the difference. Because to your exact point, it's like you probably are not doing something with AI, like you're probably utilizing it as a tool. And a lot of people got caught up in this with Web3, where they got stuck and branded as a Web3 company when they really were using the tool as a platform for something else, but everyone wanted to invest in Web3. And so now that they're transitioning, they're still holding on to that narrative because they don't separate the technology and the functioning of the technology and how it works. And the story, what they're trying to build. And all of a sudden, it's like, if you separate the story, it's easy to say, oh, yeah, we're still using blockchain for transaction transparency or whatever. And everyone's gonna be like, okay. Like, but if you say we're a blockchain company doing blockchain stuff, and we're doing Web3 stuff and Web3, then they're like, well, that's not really what's happening materially in the world. It's like you have to understand what culture is saying as marketing language versus what you're building. I think you're spot on about that. And the best founders, I think, we tend to find, not that they can't be decisive, but they have a lot of pragmatism. They are slow in their early decisions. They are, they're not looking for the flashy things. And it's not really, I think we're all running so fast. It's not really anyone. It's like, who's to blame, but maybe no one's to blame, but everyone's to blame for like the fact that we don't slow down to ask the right question, that we're just looking for the accolade and the high five and the stamp of approval to do the thing. I mean, I am really happy to see there was a whole like 5 or 6 years where like, so, okay, if you think about, I joined the space 2013. So then it was just like, shoot the moon, I'm trying to IPO. Everyone was like, I'm trying to IPO. 2015, 16, 17, it became, I'm trying to figure out who I can sell to. Who can I sell this to? But that was the narrative. Like, what's your exit strategy going to be? Now, and that's so funny to me because if you're an angel investor or you're, and you're asking who you're going to sell to, that's because that's what they care about. But you go to a venture capitalist and they go, who are you going to sell to? You say someone, they're going to go, what? I want you to shoot the moon. So you have two different opposing positions inside the investment ecosystem of how they want you to position your business. Now you're in like, okay, last 3 years, everyone's like, last 5, maybe like 2021, COVID happens. Everyone's like, well, there's different ways to get financing. I don't want to, do too much venture. And now we have like almost an anti-venture. Like, I don't want to do anything with venture capital, right? But all of that is sentiment. It's not grounded in like business practice. Like, what is your business and what does your business need? All of that journey of that story, it's going to keep on looping, over and over again. And it's like, when you can step out of that as a business owner and go, what am I trying? I think that's the work of anyone who wants to be an entrepreneur, is like, how are you going to get pragmatic and start to look at, I'm trying to build something. What are the stepping stones to build something versus what's all the other noise? That to me is the biggest, concern I have for Black and brown founders building in this space, is that we're caught up in the culture and the noise, and we're not being pragmatic. And that's dangerous because we're losing our shirt. We don't have another shirt to put on, unlike other founder types. So I mean, that was my little soapbox for no reason.
No, thank you for being on that soapbox. And I think that that's once again I've stopped reading. I used to obsessively read like tech press in general. like, and like who's doing what deal, da, 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 da. And I stopped doing that. Like I gain nothing from it except anxiety. If something big happens, obviously I'll read about it. If there's a perspective or something new that's come along, I'll read about it. But the reality is like that day to day kind of like reading of tech press, I think is really unhealthy. It takes, especially if you're building complex and nuanced solutions for complex and nuanced problems, you have to give yourself a 10-year timeline. I have yet to see somebody who can do it in less. It just requires that much. You know what I mean? It requires that much thinking, working, going through probably 2 to 3 teams, because the team that you start off with is not the team that you're going to end up with. Very few people can hang for the whole duration, and I include myself in that category. It does require people to be able to have mental shifts and working shifts and ways of working that are different in each and every stage of building something. And I just think about that also, right? Like I think about like, what are and that people get older, like who you are in 10 years earlier is very different from who you're going to be 10 years later. The family and social responsibilities you might have are very different. We also come from communities in which those community responsibilities show up in different ways. You know, our families get older. We might have an aunt, uncle, grandma that we have to take care of. We take care of each other's children. We do a whole bunch of other things for ourselves in a very different way. And so buying into a startup culture that was never built for us is also really deeply unhealthy. And that includes things like, I'm going to grind away 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. I'm going to code away, code away, code away. I'm like, you could probably do that for 6 to 8 months. You could think of it as like running a marathon and training for running a marathon. But at some point, your body's going to give away. Your brain's going to give away. You're going to need a break. You're going to need a vacation. And we just don't have a startup culture that says that's okay. Or that there's cycles to these things, right? And that you should know what cycle you're in, and you should know how to switch from one cycle to another. We just never have that conversation either.
And probably most folks really don't, because I think about like when I closed my company, like, and the amount of grieving, like I didn't grieve. Yeah, I didn't expect to grieve. And so it was funny because I like had a company, shuttered it, started another one, that one exploded. And I was not prepared for like the emotions I felt having to shift my identity that I had connected to this idea. And so, you know, I think about, particularly for Black women and people of color, period, but to your point earlier of like the how we define ourselves and our success and kind of why we do things. And it made me have to really look and go. And it was so funny because I went through something similar. I kind of went through and said, here's all the things I've done in the last decade. Here's what I learned. Here's where I failed, where I succeeded, you know, where I was great. And it was a really good grounding of like, okay, I'm not a horrible human being because I just failed at this thing. Like, this is really what I'm coming with. But I was just sitting with a friend the other day, and she works in venture also. And we were just talking about some stuff, and I'm talking about things to do. And she goes, you know what? You really are an entrepreneur, aren't you? Because the ideas, the new ideas, I was like, I'm thinking about that. And it's like, I couldn't even stop myself. And it was really a funny moment because I never called myself that when I was young. I used to just like to build things, organization groups. It was something I took on maybe about a decade ago as a title. It wasn't something I actually, even though I was selling scarves and doing stuff and I was making, I never called myself an entrepreneur. Called myself that, had a horrible bout of it. Left it, like, that's done, that's dead. That's not who I am anymore. Let me find something else that I can be. Then having like last week being like, oh no, but you really still are that. I'm like, okay. So, you know, you kind of go through these phases, I think, get the grace of that. I mean, and so I'll say, well, actually, even just, you know, with that being said, you know, maybe kind of a closing question here, you know, having been in this space for a while, you know, what do you think folks really miss or don't get, you know, about being a Black or brown founder?
That we have deep roots in it. That while we might be using new tools, I have yet to meet someone where they tell me that somewhere along the line in their family, there wasn't someone that was making and selling something, right? Like one of my grandfathers was a typewriter repair guy. His father died when he was very young. He had a whole bunch of sisters. And he got a scholarship through an uncle to go to Cuba and learn how to repair typewriters. And so I always think of my grandfather as an early IT guy. And he had his own business. He never worked for anybody else. He never wanted to work for somebody else. And I think about that too, of like, just as I'm telling you this story, I've heard of people talk about their grandparents being electricians or their grandparents being folks that were in construction or whatever it might be, people who were always makers, people who knew how to sew, who knew how to plant, who knew how to grow, who knew how to pickle, who knew how to jam. And that's technology too. We just get to have 21st century technology. That's different. But that we come from creative people. We come from creative people who've always tried to find a solution to the economic problems that they've had, regardless of the circumstances that they're in, regardless of the trauma that they're in. And so I think like that kind of entrepreneurial spirit of like, when you're like talking about like all the ideas that you have, I think about that. I think about all my family members that have always had great ideas, but didn't always have access to be able to make them happy and to make them solid and doable things. And so how lucky are we that we get to do that? How lucky are we that we get to support people doing that? Like, I think of that, like, if that to me is like my huge privilege. My huge privilege is being able to do that because I come from people that have a legacy. And so often we don't think of the legacies that we come from, or we dismiss them or discount them because the world dismissed them and discounted them. But I always try to like remind people and ask people those questions of like, tell me about your family. Tell me what your family is like, because I am telling you, I have yet to meet somebody who's in this kind of like tech entrepreneurship space that's a person of color that doesn't come from people that at some point had to solve a solution that was really difficult and managed to do so with some sort of technology that they had at hand. So I just think about that a lot. Like that to me is grounding. So it doesn't depend on then it's like VC, not VC, whatever all these other things are. Like, to me, that's like that's also a privilege to be able to have that conversation, knowing fully well that at some point, my grandfather was like, I got to feed a family and I got to figure out how to do it. And I'm going to go learn a skill, and I'm going to learn how to make money with that skill. And I'm just going to keep myself going and keep this family going. And so I just know that if my grandfather had that, if my grandmothers had the ability to go door to door and be rejected selling shoes, like whatever I contend with is a walk in the park.
Yeah, no, I love that. Thank you so much, Deldelp, for your time today. This was amazing. I could talk to you for hours. Oh my gosh. But yes, so I want to say thank you to everyone who's listening and watching, and please feel free to send Deldelp any questions that you have.
Yes.
About her work and the Black and Brown Founders Organization. And so thanks for watching another episode of Accelerator Insider, where we talk to MDs about how they're building the future of tech and business. Thank you so much.